At 2:47 a.m., my phone lit up with a message from my 13-year-old daughter, "Dad, call me while you still can." My blood ran cold. I abandoned everything and rushed home, driven by a fear I couldn't explain. What I found shattered me. My wife, the woman I trusted most, had sold our daughter to a so-called school. But it wasn't a school. It was a hidden prison, where children were forced into labor. And the worst part, the man running it, was her own brother. They planned it together, covered every trace. If I had been a moment later, I might have lost my daughter for Evie. I appreciate you settling in with me for this one. One small thing before we start, drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you stopped asking questions? Yes or no, I'd love to hear it. I read more of your words than you realize. A few details in this story have been shaped for storytelling purposes. The lesson at its core is what I hope stays with you. The cell signal died somewhere south of Withville, and that was when the quiet in the truck became the kind of quiet that means something. I am a man who measures things for a living. 55 years old, federal bridge supervisor. 23 years inspecting concrete and rebar for the kinds of fractures you can't see until traffic is already on them. My hands smell like graph paper and cold coffee more days than not. I've driven this stretch of I-81 so many times that the Virginia hills register less as landscape and more as elapsed distance gray-green lumps ticking off the miles between me and wherever my daughter is. The Tennessee Bridge had collapsed the schedule, not the structure. Emergency Foundation Inspection Supervisory Crew released 5 weeks early. I should have been relieved. Instead, I turned south and kept driving because 3 weeks ago, my 13-year-old daughter left me a voicemail I'd only listened to once and hadn't been able to listen to again. "Hey, Dad, everything's fine here. I'm learning a lot. Call me when you..." A metallic clang. A pause long enough to fit something ugly inside. "When you get a chance." Have you ever listened to your child's voice and known, not suspected known, that the words coming out aren't hers? Ren has said the word fine to me 1,000 times. Fine when she scraped her knee at 7. Fine when her best friend moved to Asheville in 4th grade. Fine when I told her I'd be gone for 6 weeks on the Chicago project. Every single time. The word had texture, irritation, bravery, resignation. Something real pressing through the syllable. This fine was laminated, sealed. She said it the way people read from a card taped to a wall just out of the camera's frame. I played the voicemail once more at a gas station outside Bristol. The metallic sound was clearer through the truck speakers, not a pan dropping or a locker shutting. It was heavy, structural. The sound of an iron gate on a track, the kind with a counterweight. I know that sound because I've inspected facilities that have them. Prisons have them. Processing plants have them. Schools do not. The rain picked up past Marion. I pulled into a rest stop at noon, bought a coffee I didn't drink, and called home. She answered on the 6th ring. "Marcus Garrison. I wasn't expecting you until the 14th. The project fell through. Where's Ren?" Lorraine Prescott Holbrook had a particular gift for making warmth sound spontaneous when it wasn't. She'd married me 14 months ago, after what I'd believed was an accidental meeting at a company fundraiser. Wine spilled on my jacket, an apology that turned into dinner, a courtship that moved at exactly the speed a lonely widower with a young daughter would find flattering, but not suspicious. She was 41, worked in nonprofit development, and had a way of making every room feel managed without anyone noticing the management. Right now, her voice was doing something I'd cataloged in bridge inspections, but never in a marriage. It was load-bearing in the wrong direction, holding something up by pushing down. "She's at boarding school. You knew that. We discussed this before you left." I remembered signing papers. 2 frantic hours between wrapping the Chicago project and leaving for Tennessee, a stack of documents on the kitchen counter. Lorraine pointing to the yellow tabs. Just the flagged ones, the enrollment deadlines won't wait. I'd signed them the way I signed expense reports. Without reading, the memory sat in my stomach like wet concrete. I want to talk to her. They don't allow outside contact during the integration period. That's the whole framework. No disruptions to the process. What process? It's a 60-day adjustment protocol. I explained this, Garrison. It's in the materials I left on your desk. I want you to understand something about that pause, the one between my question and her answer. It wasn't the pause of someone remembering. It was the pause of someone deciding how much to give away. I've listened to contractors explain cracks in load-bearing walls with that same cadence, confident, measured. And precisely one sentence ahead of the question, they're hoping you won't ask. I asked it anyway. The address, Lorraine. She gave it to me the way people surrender something they've already decided isn't theirs flat, like reading numbers off a wall. A road in Polk County, North Carolina. I wrote it on the back of a fuel receipt with a pencil that was almost too dull to mark. Garrison, please don't just show up. You'll disrupt her adjustment and they'll... I hung up. Here is what I noticed and filed away in the order I noticed it. She called me Marcus before correcting herself, a name that belongs to no one in my life and no one in hers that I've met. She knew the return date of a project she had no professional reason to track. And she deployed the phrase, integration period, without hesitation, like a term she'd used before to someone else. In a conversation I wasn't part of. I typed the address into my phone and pulled up the satellite image. It was dated 2019, 4 years old, which meant whatever was there now could be different, better, worse. But what the satellite showed was this: an iron gate. A dirt road swallowed by trees within 50 yards, and behind the canopy just visible at the edge of the frame, a long red brick building with no windows on the ground floor. I've inspected a lot of structures in 23 years. I've seen schools, hospitals, warehouses, water treatment facilities, and 2 federal holding centers in West Virginia. That building looked like a lot of things. None of them were a school. I closed the satellite image and pulled back onto the interstate, but that windowless building stayed behind my eyes like a flashbulb afterimage. And standing there in the rest stop parking lot, I thought about Rex. Rex knew before any of us did, and I punished him for it. 8 months earlier, January, the front porch. Lorraine came for dinner for the 3rd time, and Rex, my 7-year-old shepherd mix with one torn ear and a bark that could rattle the storm windows, planted himself between the door and the woman walking up the steps and would not move. Not growling, barking. The full-throated, load-bearing kind that comes from the chest, not the throat. The kind that means this is not a request. Wren stood behind the screen door watching. 13 years old, her mother's sharp cheekbones a habit of cataloging details the way other girls collected charms. She didn't say a word. She just watched me grab Rex by the collar and pull him toward the backyard gate. Lorraine laughed on the porch. He'll get used to me. Dogs always do. Rex never did. The 2nd time was March. I came home from a 4-day site visit to find Lorraine in Wren's bedroom, helping her organize for the semester. Rex was throwing himself against the backyard fence, barking in a pattern I'd never heard: 3 short, 1 long, 3 short, like a signal. Wren was sitting on her bed, holding a stack of folded shirts, watching Lorraine open and close her dresser drawers. She had the expression of someone being helped by a person they haven't asked for help from. I locked Rex outside. I told Wren that Lorraine was just being nice. Wren nodded the way she nods when she's decided the argument isn't worth having. She was 13. She shouldn't have already known how to make that calculation. I need you to understand what I did. I had a dog who was telling me the truth every single day, and I locked him in the yard for it. By August, Rex in the backyard was the default. His warning had become background noise, something I stepped over on my way to the quiet, managed comfort of a house Lorraine had reorganized around herself. So gradually, I didn't notice the furniture had moved until I couldn't find my own coffee mugs. The last night before Ren was driven to that school, Rex scratched the backyard gate until 3 in the morning. I lay in bed, listening, too tired to get up, while Lorraine slept beside me with the particular stillness of someone who is very much awake. At some point, the scratching stopped. I looked out the window. Rex was sitting at the gate, not moving, just watching the house through the gap between the boards. He stayed like that until dawn. That was his last warning. After that, he just went quiet. I drove south through the dark, thinking about all of this. The rain had stopped somewhere past the North Carolina line, and the highway opened up into that long, empty stretch of I-85, where there's nothing but pine trees and truckers running their headlights on high beam. I had 7 hours of driving ahead, and nothing to do with them except inventory every signal I'd missed. I opened my email at a red light in Lexington. There it was, buried under 6 weeks of bridge specs and expense approvals, a message from the office of the headmistress, sent the same week I'd left for Tennessee. During the adjustment period, direct contact is temporarily restricted to ensure optimal integration. All inquiries should be directed to the administrative office. I'd never heard of a school that restricted a parent from calling their own child. I'd also never opened this email when it arrived, because I was standing on a bridge deck reading stress fractures, and my daughter's boarding school was something I'd already filed under handled. Lorraine handled it. That was the arrangement. I worked. She managed. Somewhere in the efficiency of that division, I'd stopped noticing that the person being managed was my daughter. 2 texts. That's what my daughter had left of me. 2 texts sitting in our message thread like 2 knocks on a door. The first, "Dad, when are you coming home?" Sent August 29th. I'd replied next week from a job site in Knoxville and gone back to reading load calculations. The second, 4 days later, "Dad, just my name with a question mark." I'd replied the same 2 words, "next week," and hadn't thought about it again until right now. Driving 83 miles an hour through the dark, with my jaw clenched so tight, my back teeth ached. 2 questions from my 13-year-old daughter. I'd answered both with the same 2 words. Then I went back to measuring the tensile strength of bridge cables, while someone measured the tensile strength of my family and found it lacking. There was no third text. I checked the thread 4 times between Lexington and Salisbury, each time hoping I'd missed a message, a follow-up, even an angry emoji, anything that meant she was still reaching. The thread ended on September 2nd. Her last word to me was my own name, punctuated with a question mark floating in a blue bubble with no reply beneath it, except my useless, identical "next week." Either she gave up on me or someone took the phone out of her hands. I pressed the accelerator past 85 because both possibilities were exactly as bad, and the only thing I could control was the distance between me and that iron gate. The truck shook on the rough pavement. The coffee thermos rolled off the passenger seat and hit the floor with a hollow sound. I left it there, somewhere ahead in the dark, past the pine corridor, and the county line. That red brick building sat behind its gate, waiting for morning. My daughter was inside it, and the last creature in my house who had tried to warn me was sitting in a backyard. I was 300 miles away from quiet, now done trying. I found Cedar Haven Academy at 5:47 in the morning, and the first thing I saw was my daughter carrying a crate of vegetables in the dark. The drive had taken 7 hours. I hadn't stopped, hadn't slept, had run on thermos coffee and the specific fuel of a man who knows he's made a terrible mistake, but doesn't yet know its shape. Now I was parked 200 yards from a locked iron gate on a dirt road in Polk County, North Carolina, with my work binoculars pressed against my eye sockets hard enough to leave marks. The brochure I'd found online during a fuel stop outside Salisbury had promised sunlit classrooms, a modern library, smiling students in pressed uniforms beneath a tagline about unlocking potential. The place in front of me had a high-angle security camera bolted to a steel post, no welcome sign, and a dirt road that disappeared into fog 20 yards past the gate. The red brick building from the satellite image was real. So were the missing ground floor windows replaced by narrow ventilation slits, the kind I'd seen on industrial storage facilities in West Virginia. 6 children in moss-green uniforms were unloading vegetable crates from a flatbed truck backed up to a storage shed. No one spoke. No one laughed. The truck's diesel engine idled in the wet air, and the only other sound was wood scraping on concrete as the crates came off the tailgate one by one. The 4th child turned to set a crate on the stack, and the fog shifted just enough. Wren. She was thinner. That was the first thing. The second was how she held the crate, both arms underneath chin, tucked, the posture of someone carrying something heavier than vegetables. Her cheekbones were sharper than 6 weeks ago, and her eyes were fixed on the ground with the kind of focus that isn't concentration. It's compliance. Someone had taken my daughter, a girl who walked into every room, scanning corners, cataloging exits, noticing what didn't belong, and trained that out of her in 42 days. If you've never watched your child through binoculars at 6 in the morning because you weren't allowed through the front gate, I hope you never have to learn what that does to the inside of your chest. It isn't anger, not yet. Anger comes later when you have somewhere to aim it. What I felt was closer to the moment a bridge inspector sees the first crack propagate across a load-bearing beam, the recognition that something fundamental has already failed. And everything still standing is standing on borrowed time. I put the binoculars down. My hands were shaking, not from cold. She didn't look toward the gate. Not once. In 13 years, I had never seen my daughter enter or leave a space without checking what was around her. She did it at grocery stores, at her school's front entrance, at the kitchen door, when she heard an unfamiliar voice. It was a habit I'd never taught her. She'd come by it the way some children come by left-handedness, as an innate orientation toward awareness. Now she moved like the other 5 children, eyes down, rhythm mechanical, no scanning, no curiosity. 6 small figures moving in synchronized silence. And if you'd watched from a distance without binoculars, you might have mistaken it for discipline. I didn't mistake it for anything. The morning chill came through the cracked truck window, carrying red clay and diesel and something else, kitchen grease, drifting from a vent on the east side of the building. I shifted the binoculars right and found a lit window. A kitchen. Stainless steel counters, industrial stove, a row of plates being set along a serving line. A man moved through the frame. Around 50, salt and pepper hair, cut short, moving with the unhurried economy of someone comfortable in a commercial kitchen. His hands were working a spatula over a flat griddle, and nothing about him registered as unusual at first glance. A cook making breakfast at a boarding school, unremarkable as wallpaper. There are 2 kinds of people in a room when someone screams: the ones who flinch and the ones who were already expecting it. I was about to find out which kind this man was. A figure in a collared shirt stormed through the kitchen's side door. Even through the glass, and at 200 yards, I could see the posture, rigid arm pointing, finger mouth open. A teacher, berating a child who stood at the dish station with wet hands frozen in midair. Every person in that kitchen flinched. The child at the sink, a second child carrying a tray, a woman restocking napkins by the door. Their shoulders came up. Their hands went still. Their bodies contracted the way bodies do when shouting is the weather, and you've learned to make yourself small until it passes. The cook didn't flinch. His hands paused for 1 second, spatula hovering above the griddle, then resumed. He didn't turn his head. He didn't look at the teacher or the child. He did something more interesting. He glanced up at the security camera mounted above the kitchen door, held the look for exactly 1 beat, and turned back to his eggs. I didn't understand that look at the time. A cook checking a camera could mean anything: habit, paranoia, boredom. But I filed it the way I file hairline fractures on inspection reports, noted. Time-stamped, flagged for follow-up. Then he did something I couldn't explain at all. He set down his spatula, turned to the window facing the dirt parking area, and looked directly at the spot where my truck sat. 200 yards away, behind tinted glass engine off in a vehicle he had no reason to know was there. He held the look for 3 seconds. Then he gave one small nod, not to me, not to anyone I could see, and went back to his eggs. The morning fog swallowed the building's edges. My coffee was cold. My daughter was 50 yards past a locked gate, and a cook I'd never met had just acknowledged my presence from inside a building I couldn't enter. I didn't wait to understand the cook's nod. I got out of the truck and walked straight to the gate because waiting had stopped being something I was capable of. The iron was cold under my palm. Up close, the gate was heavier than it looked, commercial grade, the kind rated for vehicle impact, with rust blooming at the hinges where the morning dew had been working for years. The security camera above it had a blinking red light that pulsed every 2 seconds. I pressed the intercom button and held it, static. Then a voice, young male, careful. Cedar Haven Academy. How can I help you? My name is Garrison Holbrook. My daughter Wren Holbrook is a student here. I'm at the front gate and I need to see her. A pause. The kind that involves someone looking at someone else. Sir, all visits are by appointment only. 72 hours notice minimum. I can give you a number to call. I'm her father. I don't need an appointment to see my own child. Sir, I understand. But our integration protocol requires... Open the gate! Another pause. I heard the click of a radio channel switching. The guard came back on with the rehearsed patience of someone who had been trained for this specific conversation. Sir, I've contacted our administrative office. Someone will reach out to you within 48 hours. In the meantime, I need to ask you to return to your vehicle. I didn't return to my vehicle. I stood at the gate with both hands on the bars and watched the building through the trees. The children had finished unloading the truck and gone inside. The kitchen light was still on. The cook was no longer visible. 18 minutes later, a Polk County cruiser came up the dirt road and parked behind my truck. 18 minutes. I want you to think about that. A county deputy on a dirt road in rural Polk County, population sparse. Nearest station at least 30 minutes from anything, arrived 18 minutes after a security guard pressed a radio button. That's not response time. That's a standing arrangement. Deputy Harlan Graves stepped out of the cruiser without urgency. Late 30s, sunburned across the nose and forearms. The careful neutrality of a man who'd been told exactly what to say before he arrived. He adjusted his belt, closed the door with one hand, and walked toward me like we were about to discuss a parking violation. Morning, sir. Everything all right out here? My daughter is inside that school. I haven't spoken to her in 6 weeks. They won't let me through the gate. I understand that's frustrating, but the school is a private institution on private property. If they have a visitation policy, that's within their rights. Do you have children, Deputy? He didn't answer. He looked at the gate, then at me, then at his dashboard. His jaw worked once like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. That look was the answer. Sir, there's no violation here. I'd recommend contacting them through proper channels. He said it the way people read from a card, even cadence, no emphasis on any particular word, the verbal equivalent of a form letter. Then he got back in his cruiser and sat there with the engine running until I returned to my truck. I drove 500 meters down the road and pulled off onto a gravel shoulder behind a stand of tulip poplars. The deputy's cruiser passed me 2 minutes later. He didn't slow down. He didn't look. I opened my laptop. 30 years I'd been reading what was underneath things other people walked over without thinking. Soil composition reports, rebar grid layouts, subsurface drainage maps. As a GS-14 federal infrastructure supervisor, I had access to USGS topographic databases, DOT underground utility overlays, and county cadastral records going back to the mid-century. I had never once used any of it for anything other than bridge foundations and highway drainage. I typed in the Cedar Haven property coordinates. The first overlay told me the land had been a Polk County water treatment facility in the 1970s, decommissioned in 1983, sold to a private trust in 1996, converted to its current use sometime after 2002. The building footprint matched what I'd seen through the binoculars. The main structure sat on the old treatment plant's foundation, which explained the windowless ground floor. Those weren't design choices. They were inherited infrastructure. The second overlay told me something the school's architects either didn't know or didn't care about. A sewer main, 90 centimeters in diameter, predating the school by 4 decades, running from a public road manhole 340 meters northeast of the main building. Under an easement, the county never revoked directly into the campus's northeast corner. 90 centimeters. That's 3 feet. Tight for a man my size. But I'd crawled through tighter during the Kanawha Valley inspection. In 2019, a collapsed culvert survey, where the only access was a maintenance shaft I'd had to enter sideways. This was wider, straighter, and it terminated inside the property line, not outside it. I checked the manhole's location on the satellite overlay. It sat on a public road under county jurisdiction. Whatever Cedar Haven owned, whatever fences they'd built, and whatever deputies they had on speed dial, whatever 72-hour policies they'd written into their intake contracts, they didn't own the ground beneath them. Not this part of it. I closed the laptop and opened the trunk. Headlamp, protective coveralls, work gloves, knee pads, a respirator mask rated for hydrogen sulfide because a decommissioned sewer still carries gas. These were the tools I packed for every field inspection. The equipment of a man who spent his career crawling under things other people built and never thought about. The gate could keep me out. The deputy and his rehearsed script could keep me out. But nobody had thought to lock the ground itself, because nobody expected a father to come at this problem the way an engineer reads a blueprint from underneath. I had the sewer route mapped and the gear ready, but I needed daylight, and I needed information. I checked into a motel in Columbus, 7 miles from Cedar Haven, and waited. The principal called at exactly 10 a.m., which told me she'd been watching a clock. Celeste Pennington's voice arrived through the phone with the calibrated warmth of a woman who had rehearsed sincerity until it sounded almost real. She was the head of Cedar Haven Academy. I'd found that much on the school's website, which featured a professional headshot of a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and the composed smile of someone who controlled every room she entered. Her title was founding director. Her bio mentioned a doctorate in educational psychology. Nothing about pre-dawn vegetable hauling. Mr. Holbrook, I understand you visited campus this morning. I want to assure you that Wren is settling in beautifully. The integration period is a crucial developmental window, and any disruption could undermine weeks of meaningful progress. Her voice was warm the way a thermostat is warm, set to a number. I let her finish the paragraph she'd prepared. Then I asked my question. What was my daughter doing at 5:47 this morning? Silence. I want you to notice what she didn't say. She didn't say vegetables like she was confused. She didn't ask how I knew. She didn't laugh it off or correct me. She went silent, the way someone goes silent when they're not surprised by the information, only surprised that you have it. Our curriculum includes agricultural responsibility modules. Students participate in... She's 13. She was carrying crates in the dark before 6 in the morning. Is that in the brochure? Mr. Holbrook, I appreciate your concern, but the program has been carefully designed by developmental specialists. If you'd like, I can arrange a parent orientation once the integration window closes. When does it close? 60 days from enrollment. My wife told me the same number. Your wife, I should say. My second wife, because I don't have a wife. I have a second wife who enrolled my daughter in your school while I was working in another state. and I need to see that contract right now." The line held for 4 seconds. The motel air conditioner rattled in the wall unit. Through the thin curtains, I could see the parking lot baking in mid-morning sun. My truck sitting there with a trunk full of inspection gear and a cadastral map I hadn't closed. "Of course," Celeste said. Very even, very measured. The voice of a woman who had just moved me from one mental file to another. "We'll have the enrollment documents sent to you by end of business today. And Mr. Holbrook, we truly want what's best for Wren. I hope you'll give the process a chance to work." She hung up before I could answer. That was deliberate, too. The person who ends the call controls the conversation's last impression. I've watched contractors do it after delivering bad inspection news, close the door while the echo is still theirs. The contract didn't arrive by end of business. It didn't arrive at all. I spent the afternoon on the motel bed with my laptop open, reading everything I could find about Cedar Haven's corporate structure. The school was registered as a non-profit under a parent entity called Ridgecrest Holdings, Incorporated in Delaware. The board of directors listed 3 names I didn't recognize. Tax filings showed annual revenue just under the threshold that would trigger enhanced IRS scrutiny. The website had been updated recently. The cached version from 6 months ago showed different tuition figures lower by almost 40%. Someone had raised prices and rewritten the site between the time Lorraine found it and the time I went looking. At 8 that evening, I checked my email. Nothing from Celeste. Nothing from anyone. I was about to close the laptop when I glanced at the spam folder. One message received at 6:47 p.m. from an address that was nothing but randomized numbers at a disposable mail service. Subject line, "From the girl's friend." 4 letters. How do you hold that number in your head 4 times? Your child sat down and wrote to you, and 4 times someone walked those pages from her hands into a drawer and closed it. The email was short. No greeting, no sign-off, no name. "Dad, your daughter wrote you 4 times. The letters are held in the front office. There is a teacher here who goes by Graves. He is dangerous. She asked me to pass this along if anyone ever came looking for her. I can't say more. Be careful." I read it 3 times. The tone was careful, literate adult, not a child. The word "dad" wasn't the sender speaking. It was a quotation. Someone was relaying what Wren had asked them to say, using her word for me as a credential. Whoever this was knew my email address, knew how to use a disposable service, and had been close enough to my daughter that she trusted them with a message meant for me. I traced the sending IP. It took 20 minutes, and a .network diagnostic tool I wasn't technically supposed to use for personal purposes. The address resolved to a public terminal at the Tryon Public Library, 11 miles from Cedar Haven. I pulled up the library's website. 3 public access computers. Open Wednesdays and Fridays only. Today was Tuesday. The cook's face surfaced in my mind. Salt and pepper hair hands that paused instead of flinching. That nod through the kitchen window aimed at a truck he shouldn't have been able to see. Someone at Cedar Haven had midweek access to leave campus and reach a public terminal. Someone with the composure to send an anonymous message and the proximity to hear my daughter ask for help. I didn't have proof, but I had a library a day of the week and the memory of a man who looked at a security camera like he knew exactly what it was recording and for whom. Wednesday morning, I woke at 5 with a plan for the library and a list of questions that kept getting longer. But first, the truck. I almost missed it, a black box the size of a cigarette pack, magneted to the frame rail behind the rear axle in the one spot a civilian would never think to look. I found it because 30 years of crawling under bridges had given me a habit most people don't have. Before I drive, I check underneath. The box was smooth warm from residual engine heat and mounted with a neodymium magnet strong enough that I had to pry it with 2 fingers. It wasn't the fleet tracker my agency installs on government vehicles. I knew where that one sat, up near the transmission housing with a DOT asset sticker on it. This was something else. Consumer-grade shell, but modified. No brand markings. A cellular antenna thinner than a matchstick. I didn't remove it. A tracker you know about is a tracker you can use. I drove 10 kilometers to a commercial truck lot outside Mill Spring, parked between two long-haul rigs, where the signal would look like I was stationary, and rented a sedan from a counter inside the fuel station, using a backup credit card I'd opened years ago for emergencies. The rental smelled like new plastic and someone else's air freshener. I called a colleague at the DOT regional office from the rental's parking lot. "That's not fleet hardware," he said after I described it. "Consumer-grade but modified longer battery cellular uplink. Whoever placed it wanted daily pings, not just trip logs. How long has your truck been accessible to someone other than you? Since March." The answer came before I finished doing the math. Lorraine had driven my truck to the dealership for an oil change in March, while I was on the Chicago project. She'd volunteered. She'd said the service light was on, and she didn't want me worrying about it while I was away. 6 months. I want you to sit with that number. Every time I'd told Lorraine my schedule, leaving Monday, back Thursday, stopping in Roanoke for fuel, she wasn't listening. She was confirming. Every window where I was far enough away for long enough wasn't an accident. It was a calculation verified in real time by a device she'd stuck to my truck while pretending to do me a favor. I left the truck at the lot, with its tracker pinging to no one in particular, and drove the rental back to Columbus. The enrollment contract had arrived by email at 11 p.m. the previous night, not from Celeste, but from an administrative address with no name attached. I'd printed it at the motel's front desk. 14 pages, dense, typed 3 signature tabs with my initials on each one. I remembered the pen. I remembered the kitchen counter. I did not remember a single word on any of these pages. Dale Compton was a Columbus attorney in his early 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a desk buried under land survey folders. He handled property disputes, small business contracts, the kind of quiet legal work that keeps a small-town practice running. I'd found him in the phone book, the actual paper phone book in the motel nightstand, because I didn't want to search for lawyers on a phone that might also be compromised. He read the contract twice before he looked up. "This clause here," he said, tapping the middle of page 6. "The school may determine all aspects of the student's schedule, activities, and communication throughout the enrollment period. Mr. Holbrook, that's not an education agreement. That's a labor waiver dressed in academic language." He turned to page 9. "And this supplementary rider, agricultural services, catering production, and facilities maintenance, as part of vocational curriculum. They're authorizing your daughter to work. Farm work, kitchen work, building maintenance, under the heading of education." I signed it. That was the thing I couldn't get past. Nobody forged my name. Nobody held a gun to my hand. I picked up a pen in a 2-hour window between jobs and signed away my daughter's rights because I was in a hurry, and my wife pointed to the yellow tabs, and I trusted her the way you trust the floor to hold your weight without thinking, because thinking about it would mean admitting you'd built your life on something that might not be solid. "Did you read this before signing?" Dale asked. "No, I had 2 hours between projects." He nodded, not with judgment, with the weary recognition of a man who'd seen what shortcuts cost. He turned to the last page and pointed to the footer. Small type, barely legible in the printout's low resolution. "The drafting firm is Whitfield and Carlisle in Charlotte. I know them by reputation. They do commercial real estate. Shopping centers, LLC and corporations, property holding structures. I've been practicing for 31 years, and I have never seen a student enrollment contract come out of a firm like that." "Who hired them?" "That's the question, isn't it?" He took off his glasses and set them on the contract. Mr. Holbrook, whoever built this document, knew exactly what they were building. This isn't a school policy someone copied from a template. This is bespoke legal architecture designed to make compulsory labor look like curriculum and isolation look like pedagogy. And the drafting date is 4 months before your daughter's enrollment. They started building this before she was enrolled. 4 months before. The contract was commissioned in April. Wren was enrolled in August. Someone had walked into a Charlotte law office in the spring, described exactly what they needed, and paid enough that a commercial real estate firm agreed to draft a document that had nothing to do with real estate and everything to do with making a building full of children look legal from the outside. I drove back to the motel in the rental car with the contract on the passenger seat and the tracker pinging uselessly at a truck lot 10 kilometers away. The library opened at noon. The contract's drafting date sat in my head like a nail while I drove to Tryon. 4 months before enrollment. Someone had been building the cage before they had the occupant. The Tryon Public Library opened at 1 o'clock on Wednesdays, and I was parked outside at 12:47. It was a small building, single-story brick facade, a handicap ramp with peeling paint, and a bulletin board by the door advertising a church potluck and a lost tabby cat. Inside, fluorescent lights, carpet that smelled like cleaner and old bindings, and 3 public access computers lined up against the far wall beneath a clock that ticked loud enough to hear from the entrance. Mabel Harwick stood behind the circulation desk. She was in her early 60s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, the kind of librarian who remembered every face that walked through her door and filed them by frequency and purpose. I showed her a photo of Wren on my phone and asked if she'd seen this girl. Not the girl," Mabel said. "But there's a man kitchen staff, I think, from that school up the road. Comes every Wednesday, uses the computer for about 30 minutes, prints 1 page and leaves. Quiet, polite, never checks out a book. Does he talk to anyone? No. He comes alone, keeps to himself. Last week he left something on the printer tray." She opened a drawer beneath the desk. I set it aside, meaning to return it, but he hasn't been back yet. She handed me a single sheet of paper. My hands went still. It was a map, hand-drawn in blue ballpoint over a printed satellite image of the Cedar Haven campus. Every building was labeled, every room numbered, and in the margins annotations. Small, precise, deliberate handwriting. The kitchen was marked with shift times. The main hall had camera positions noted with sightline arrows. A storage building on the south side was labeled, "Documents hidden here, Cold Storage Unit 3. The northeast corner of the property had 2 words circled twice, "Blind camera." A dead drop. That's what intelligence officers call it, when you leave information in a public place for the right person to find. Except this wasn't a spy novel. This was a 1-room library in a town with 1 traffic light, and the information was about where they kept children. Room 7 was on the 2nd floor of the main building. It was circled in the same blue ink, and next to it someone had written in letters small enough to miss if you weren't looking, "Isolation. No windows. Padlock exterior. Check on subject twice daily." Subject, not student, not child, subject. I photographed every inch of the map with my phone, then folded the original and put it in my jacket pocket. Mabel watched me without asking questions. Librarians are good at that, reading the situation, the way they read a title page, taking in the information, and deciding how much to say. "If that man comes back," I said, "don't mention me." "I don't mention anyone," she said. "That's policy." I walked to the parking lot. The afternoon sun hit the asphalt and sent up the smell of warm pine resin from the tree line across the road. I was reaching for the car door when my phone rang. Unknown number. Area code I didn't recognize. The voice was male. Hoarse. Controlled. The voice of someone speaking from a place where volume was a risk. "Mr. Holbrook, don't say my name. Don't say where you are. just listen. I listened. I've been inside 8 months. I have names, transaction records, payroll, everything. But there are 2 other locations, one in Georgia, one in Virginia. If you move now, if you go to the police or try to get her out today, they'll have 6 hours to destroy everything across all 3 sites. Records, drives, paper files, gone. Who is this? Give me 72 hours. 3 days. I can take down all 3 locations. Every name, every dollar, every child. But I need 3 more days. What would you do? Your daughter is in a windowless room right now, while you're standing in a library parking lot holding a map that calls her a subject and a stranger on a dead phone line, is asking you to leave her there for 72 more hours, to save children you've never met in states you've never visited. Which room is my daughter in? I asked. A pause, then room 7. I looked at the map in my hand. Room 7. Isolation. Padlock exterior. Check on subject twice daily. You just told me that's the isolation room. Yes. And you're asking me to leave her there. I'm asking you to give me 3 days so that what happened to your daughter doesn't keep happening to 180 other children across 3 states. I know what I'm asking. I know what it costs. The line went quiet. Not dead, I could hear breathing, faint, ambient noise, something metallic in the background. A kitchen. Pots, maybe. A ventilation hood. Then the voice lower. I'll make sure she's moved out of room 7 by tonight. That much I can do. But I need the 72 hours. I hung up. Called back. Dead. Called again. Dead. I stood in the parking lot with the map in one hand and the silent phone in the other. The clock on the library wall was visible through the window, 2:14 p.m. 72 hours from now was Saturday afternoon. 3 days of my daughter behind a padlocked door or out of it if I trusted a voice I couldn't verify, attached to a man I'd only seen through binoculars making eggs. I looked at the annotation next to room 7 one more time. Check on subject twice daily. Subject. My daughter reduced to a word you'd use for a lab rat or a prisoner or a line item in a file no one was supposed to read. I folded the map, put it in my pocket, got in the car, sat there for 5 minutes with the engine off, deciding what kind of father I was going to be. I decided to wait. Not because I trusted the voice on the phone, but because the map in my pocket told me something the voice hadn't. Whoever drew it had been inside that building for months, marking camera angles and shift changes with the patience of someone building a case, not making a plea. That kind of patience meant a plan, and a plan meant my daughter had a better chance than my rage could give her alone. I called my accountant that evening because I needed to know how much of my life was still mine. Neil Fenton had handled my finances for 15 years. He was the kind of man who spoke in numbers the way other people spoke in sentences, precise, sequential, never rounding, when he could be exact. He was also the only person other than me with full read access to my accounts. And when I asked him to pull every transaction on the joint marital account since March and flag anything I hadn't authorized, he called back within 20 minutes with a voice that had lost all its usual steadiness. 14 transfers since March, Neil said. All outbound. All to the same entity, Ridgeline Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware. No public officers listed, no business address on file. Total disbursement, $127,000. I've never heard that name. Yeah, I didn't think you had. The transfers were structured to stay under $10,000 each, just below the reporting threshold. Someone knew exactly where the line was. I wrote the number on the motel notepad, pressed hard enough to dent the page. The pen clicked in my hand, a sound I didn't realize I was making until Neil continued. There's more. The 340-acre parcel, your father's land, was transferred to Lorraine Prescott Holbrook via a comprehensive financial authorization filed with the county on August 1st. The authorization document has your signature, What's the date on it? July 19th. I was on a bridge deck in Kingsport, Tennessee on July 19th. 14-hour concrete pour. I have GPS logs, timesheets, and a foreman who'll swear to it. Neil was quiet for a moment. When he came back, the steadiness was gone entirely. Then someone forged your signature on a legal document and used it to transfer $11 million worth of real property into your wife's name while you were standing on a bridge 2 states away. $127,000. 14 transfers. 6 months. And I hadn't noticed a single one, because I was running load calculations on interstate overpasses, while the woman I'd married was running calculations of her own quieter ones with longer timelines and higher stakes, all verified by a tracker on my truck that told her exactly when it was safe to move another piece. The motel ice machine hummed through the wall. The cold coffee from that afternoon sat untouched by my laptop, forming a ring on the fake wood. I leaned my forehead into my palm and waited for the number to mean something other than what it meant. So Neil, what about the federal contract? Loyalties samin kum. Which aspect? Got the completion bonus. The 4.2 million. Another pause. Longer this time. I heard him typing. Then he stopped. The beneficiary was changed 3 weeks ago. The new designated recipient is Lorraine Prescott Holbrook. I didn't speak. The desk lamp cast a yellow circle on the notepad where I'd written the numbers. The circle looked like a spotlight on a stage where every prop had been moved while the actor was off stage. The new beneficiary of a federal contract, worth more than most people would see in a lifetime, was the woman who had put my daughter in a windowless room and tracked my truck for half a year. The completion date was 11 days away. The moment that project closed out, every dollar I'd spent 2 years earning would route directly to her. The land was already transferred. The LLC had been siphoning cash since spring. The contract bonus was timed to activate in less than 2 weeks. Everything was positioned, every dollar, every document, every forged signature like a structure engineered for a single controlled event. All that remained was for me to not be in the way when the load shifted. I sat at the motel desk and did the math the way I do structural math, looking for the point of failure, the sequence, the order of operations. The contract completes. The money moves. The land is already gone. The LLC has been draining the accounts for months. My daughter is locked in a facility run by people who call her a subject, and my wife has positioned herself as the sole beneficiary of everything I own. What was I in this equation? I was the variable being removed. I opened my laptop. The screen lit up the dark motel room in pale blue. I typed Lorraine's maiden name into a search bar, Prescott followed by 2 words, previous marriage. The results loaded in 3 seconds. A local newspaper article from Lafourche Parish, Louisiana, dated 9 years ago. I clicked it and read the headline, and then I read it again. And then I sat very still while the ice machine hummed, and the coffee went cold, and the yellow circle of the desk lamp held steady on a notepad full of numbers that suddenly meant something much worse than theft. The headline read, "Oil rig engineer dies in workplace accident. Investigation closed in 3 weeks." Below it, a photograph of a smiling man in his early 30s, wearing a drilling company uniform. His name was Derek Yancey. He had been married to Lorraine Prescott for 14 months. He had died 10 days before his own contract completion bonus was scheduled to pay out. 10 days, I had 11. 11 days. That number replaced every other thought in my head, the way a crack replaces a beam completely structurally without negotiation. His name was Derek Yancey, and 4 years ago he was alive. I read everything I could find. The obituary was short, the kind small-town papers run when the family can't afford more than the standard column. Derek Allen Yancey, 31, Pipeline Integrity Engineer, Gulf Offshore Division. survived by his parents Luther and Jolene Yancey of Lafayette, Louisiana, and a son aged 7 from a prior relationship. Preceded in death by no one who mattered to the newspaper. Married to Lorraine Prescott for 14 months at the time of his death. The accident report was harder to find, but not impossible. A fall from a rig platform during routine equipment inspection. Safety harness attributed to equipment failure. Investigation opened by Lafourche Parish and closed in 19 days. 19 days for a workplace fatality on a federal jurisdiction offshore rig. Where the standard investigative timeline, I knew this from 20 years of federal project work, was a minimum of 60. Lorraine received the life insurance payout. She also received Derek's contract completion bonus paid to next of kin when the project closed out 10 days after his death. Combined total just under $2 million. She left Lafayette within 6 weeks. Derek's son went to the paternal grandparents. Lorraine vanished into the kind of silence that costs money to maintain. I found the grandparents' number through a Lafayette White Pages listing. It was nearly midnight. I called anyway. Luther Yancey answered on the 4th ring. His voice was measured, unhurried, the voice of a man in his late 60s who had stopped expecting good news from phone calls a long time ago. I told him my name. I told him I was married to the woman who had been married to his son. I told him I thought I was in danger. The silence that followed was not the silence of surprise. It was the silence of someone who had been waiting 4 years for a stranger to say exactly those words. "Do you think that accident was real?" I asked. "No," Luther said. "But nobody believes us. I want you to hear what that old man sounded like. Not angry, not even sad exactly. Tired. The specific kind of tired that comes from saying something true for 4 years and watching every person with a badge or a title nod politely and change the subject. He'd filed a complaint with the parish sheriff. He'd written to the company's safety board. He'd called OSHA twice. Each time the same answer: investigation closed, findings conclusive. No evidence of foul play. "Derek called us the week before," Luther said. "Said something felt wrong at home but couldn't name it. Said Lorraine had been making calls she wouldn't explain and locking her phone for the first time. He told Jolene he was probably being paranoid." A pause. "That was the last time we talked to him." So, when did the accident happen relative to his contract completion? 10 days before. The company paid the bonus to next of kin. Lorraine got every cent, the insurance, the bonus, Derek's savings account. She was gone before the flowers on his grave needed watering, left our grandson with us and disappeared. No forwarding address, no phone number. No goodbye to a 7-year-old boy who'd already lost his mother to divorce. I sat on the edge of the motel bed with the phone pressed against my ear and the laptop still open on the desk. Derek Yancey's obituary photo glowing in the dark. A young man in a hard hat, smiling on a rig platform, alive and not yet aware that the woman sleeping next to him had already started the clock. 10 days. Derek Yancey died 10 days before his contract was completed. My federal contract completed in 11 days. The math wasn't a coincidence. It was a schedule. The same schedule run twice, by the same woman on 2 engineers who worked on long-distance projects and trusted their wives to manage things at home. "Mr. Yancey, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Go ahead. Did anyone else help her? Was there a woman older connected to a school or an institution?" Another silence. Then, there was a name Derek mentioned once. A woman Lorraine talked to on the phone more than anyone else. He said it sounded like a business call every time, not a friend, not family. He couldn't remember the full name. Something with a C. He said it bothered him that Lorraine never introduced them. Something with a C, Celeste. I thanked Luther Yancey. He asked me to be careful. He said it the way a man says it when careful is what his own son thought he was being. I told him I would call again. I meant it. I hung up and sat in the dark. The motel air conditioning cycled on with a rattle. The laptop screen dimmed to save power. Derek Yancey's face faded to a shadow. I looked at the ceiling, a water stain, shaped like nothing the kind you see in every budget motel between Virginia and Georgia, and I counted what I knew. The land was gone. The contract was redirected. The cash had been draining for months. My daughter was locked behind a padlocked door in a building run by people connected to the same woman who had likely killed a man on an oil rig 4 years ago. And somewhere between here and home, Lorraine was checking a GPS tracker that told her my truck was parked at a lot in Mill Spring and had been for hours. I was not investigating a school. I was not fighting a custody dispute. I was not untangling a financial misunderstanding. I was investigating my own murder, and it was already in progress. The only reason I was still alive was a suspended bridge project that had sent me home 5 weeks ahead of the schedule Lorraine had been counting on. The suspended bridge had bought me time I wasn't supposed to have. I intended to use every hour of it. I walked into the cafe the next morning like a man who had 10 days to live, because that's exactly what I was. The cafe was small, 6 tables, a chalkboard menu, an espresso machine that hissed every 40 seconds. Morning sun came through the front windows and laid warm stripes across the wooden tabletops. At the table nearest the window, a woman sat photographing her latte from 3 different angles, her manicured nails tapping the phone screen with the practiced ease of someone who made a living looking unserious. Tamara Redmond was 42, a lifestyle content creator with 2.3 million followers who tuned in for her curated blend of parenting wisdom and product recommendations. Her daughter was also enrolled at Cedar Haven. I'd found her through the school's parent directory, one of the few public-facing documents that actually listed real names. I sat down across from her without waiting for an invitation. She looked up with the polished half-smile of a woman used to being approached by strangers. The smile faded when I said Cedar Haven. When I visited on the scheduled day, my daughter looked tired. Tamara said, setting the phone face down for the first time. Not the kind of tired from studying too hard. A different kind, like she'd been carrying something heavier than books. She paused. But I don't have anything except a feeling. I have more than a feeling. I have a visual of children hauling vegetable crates at 5:47 in the morning. I have a contract drafted by a commercial real estate firm, and I have a GPS tracker my wife planted on my car. She studied me for a long time. Not the way people study someone they find interesting. The way they study someone who might be telling the truth about something expensive. $45,000. That was the price of a parent's silence, not paid as a bribe, but structured as a loss. Speak up and forfeit the money. The contract didn't threaten anyone. It just made silence the cheaper option. The contract says if a parent causes disruption, the tuition is non-refundable, Tamara said. That word disruption is doing a lot of work in that sentence. It means shut up or lose your money. I'm not asking you to lose your money. I'm asking you to be ready when I have proof. I have 2.3 million followers, she said. But followers don't mean anything without evidence. Get me proof, not feelings. Proof. I gave her my backup phone number. She gave me a look that said she was afraid of exactly the same things I was, and had been sitting alone with that fear in a cafe photographing lattes because the alternative was screaming into a void that charged $45,000 for the echo. That afternoon, Lorraine called. Her voice was different. The thermostat warmth was gone. In its place was something thinner, sharper, the voice of a woman who had moved past performing and into defending. You signed the contract. You signed the financial authorization. Everything. You have no legal basis to do anything. I didn't sign the financial authorization, I said. I was standing on a bridge in Kingsport, Tennessee that day. 14-hour concrete pour. I have GPS logs, timesheets, and a foreman's sworn record. The date on that document is July 19th. I was 400 miles away. Silence. Not her usual calculated pause. This was the silence of a machine encountering an input it hadn't been programmed for. She'd built the forgery on the assumption that I would never check, that I would continue being the man who signed things without reading them, who trusted the yellow tabs, who went back to work and left the details to her. She hung up without another word. 3 minutes later, Celeste Pennington called. Different tone, entirely warm, professional, inviting. She suggested a face-to-face meeting at the school's visitor lounge to clear up any misunderstandings. I accepted because I wanted to see the building from inside, even if it was only the lounge. Cedar Haven's visitor area was a small room off the main entrance, clean walls, framed photographs of smiling students in green uniforms, 2 artificial plants flanking a water cooler. Celeste sat across from me in a blazer and offered me water. I declined. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and artificial air freshener, the kind of smell designed to cover other smells. She explained the agricultural program in language so polished it could have been laminated. Vocational curriculum, character development, structured physical engagement. She said it the way someone recites a brochure they wrote themselves, every phrase load-tested for parent consumption. Pay attention to what she didn't say. When I mentioned the financial authorization papers, not by name, not with any detail, just the phrase, she didn't ask which papers. She didn't look confused. She looked at me the way someone looks at a card they weren't expecting to see played this early in the hand. She knew exactly which authorization I meant, because the only way to know that without being told is to have been in the room when those documents were created. I'm sure we can resolve any concerns through proper channels. Celeste said, her voice a half-degree cooler than when we'd started. I stood to leave. And as I turned toward the corridor, I glanced through the glass panel that separated the visitor lounge from the kitchen hallway. He was there, the cook. Same salt and pepper hair, same unhurried posture. He was drying a pan with a white cloth, moving with the steady economy of a man who belonged in that kitchen and nowhere else. He looked up through the glass and found my eyes immediately not searching, not scanning. He knew exactly where I'd be standing. He nodded once. Small, deliberate. The same nod from 2 days ago at dawn. But this time it carried something different. Not acknowledgement, permission. Like whatever I was about to do next, he was telling me the ground was ready. The cook's nod stayed with me on the drive back to the motel. Permission? The ground is ready. Whatever that meant, it meant tonight. I spent the last night of my old life sitting at a motel desk with a cadastral map, a dead man's timeline, and a plan that started underground. I laid everything out. The cook's annotated campus map with its camera angles and shift times. The USGS sewer overlay printed on 3 sheets taped together. The GPS logs from my truck, proving I was in Tennessee when someone forged my name. Bank statements showing 6 months of transfers to a shell company in Delaware. Scans of the enrollment contract drafted by a real estate firm. A photograph of a smiling man in a hard hat who died on an oil rig 10 days before his contract paid out. Local police were compromised. The deputy who'd arrived in 18 minutes had confirmed that much without meaning to. The anonymous caller had asked for 72 hours. I'd given him 48. That was all I had in me. I drafted an email to a federal attorney I'd worked with on bridge compliance cases, a woman in Raleigh who handled government contractor disputes and had once told me over coffee that if I ever found something that smelled wrong on a federal project, I should call her before I called anyone with a badge. I attached every document, every photograph, every bank record. The email was 4 sentences long. If you have not heard from me by 11 a.m. tomorrow, forward this package to the FBI Charlotte Field Office. Attention, violent crimes against children. The evidence is self-explanatory. My daughter's name is Wren Holbrook, age 13, currently held at Cedar Haven Academy, Polk County, North Carolina. Garrison Holbrook. I hit send at 11:47 p.m. The email chime sounded in the silent motel room, and then there was nothing, just the hum of the air conditioner and the weight of a man who had just set a timer on his own life. If I made it out with Ren by 11, the email was irrelevant. If I didn't, someone with federal authority would know everything by noon. I opened the photo of Ren on my phone. Last year, she was holding a book in the backyard, one of the paperback mysteries she devoured in single afternoons, and smiling at whoever was behind the camera. Rex was at her feet, ears up, tongue out. The particular expression of a dog who has decided that wherever this person sits is where he sits too. I hadn't asked Lorraine about Rex. Some questions you don't ask, because you already know what the answer tastes like, and you're not ready to swallow it yet. Rex had gone quiet the night before Ren was taken. He hadn't barked since. Dogs don't stop warning you because they've changed their mind. They stop because something has been done to make the warning unnecessary. I closed the photo, set the alarm for 4, lay on the bed in my clothes and stared at the ceiling until the alarm went off, which felt like 20 minutes, but the clock said 4 hours. The manhole was on a public road, 340 meters northeast of the main building. I found it at 4:38 a.m. by headlamp, a cast-iron cover stamped Polk County Water 1974. Choose half buried in gravel and leaf litter. I pried it open with a tire iron. The smell came up first, damp earth rust, decades of standing water in a pipe that hadn't carried flow since the treatment plant was decommissioned. I pulled on the protective coveralls, fitted the respirator, and dropped in. 90 centimeters. Throughout the 3 feet. Enough room to crawl on elbows and knees if you keep your head down and don't think about the weight of the earth above you. I'd spent 30 years crawling under bridges and overpasses to check rebar alignment and drainage clearance. This wasn't courage. This was Tuesday. 30 years I'd been crawling under things other people built, checking whether the foundations could hold. Now I was crawling under something built to hold children, and the foundation was rotten all the way through. The headlamp beam cut a yellow cone through the dark. The pipe walls were rough concrete slick with mineral deposits and the biological film that grows on anything wet and forgotten. Water pooled at the low points, ankle depth, cold smelling of iron and old limestone. I counted meters by the joints in the concrete sections. Each section was 3 meters. Every joint I passed was another 3 meters closer to my daughter. At the 220-meter mark, the pipe turned 15 degrees south, exactly where the 1974 county engineering report said it would. I trusted the document, because I'd spent my career trusting documents exactly like it. Engineering specifications from 40 years ago filed in a county office nobody visits, describing infrastructure nobody remembers. For once, the thing I trusted didn't betray me. The last 120 meters were straight. The air changed less stagnant, cooler, with the faint scent of wet grass coming from ahead. I could feel the slope rising. The pipe was climbing toward the surface. I reached the inlet grate at 5:08. Cast iron, same vintage as the manhole cover, secured by gravity and rust. I pushed it up with both hands. It scraped and gave. Cold mountain air hit my face, and I breathed it in, clean, sharp, the taste of being outside after 20 minutes underground. 5:10 a.m. The northeast corner of the Cedar Haven campus. No camera, no lights, wet grass under my boots. The main building sat 20 meters ahead, dark brick, 2 stories, a single light burning on the ground floor of the right wing. Room 7. The cook's map said ground floor, right wing, exterior padlock. I could see the door from where I stood. There was a padlock on it, dull brass, catching the faintest edge of pre-dawn light. And behind that door, the light was on. At 5:10 in the morning, in a room with no windows, someone had the light on because whoever was inside couldn't tell the difference between night and day anymore. 20 meters of wet grass in the dark. I crossed it in 12 seconds, staying low, moving the way you move on a bridge deck when you don't trust the surface, weight, distributed steps, deliberate. No sudden shifts. The padlock was a master combination 4 digits, the kind you buy at a hardware store for a garden shed, not the kind you use to lock a child inside a room. I had a tension wrench in my coverall pocket standard inspection toolkit, used for opening seized access panels on bridge underbellies. The lock gave in 40 seconds. It fell into my palm heavy and cold, and I set it on the ground without a sound. I opened the door, fluorescent light, buzzing. The tube had been on so long it had developed a flicker at one end, the kind of flicker that starts around the 2,000-hour mark. 2,000 hours is 83 days. The light had been burning longer than my daughter had been here. The room was small, a narrow bed with a gray blanket, a plastic chair, a bucket in the corner that I chose not to examine. No window. The air was stale and closed disinfectant layered over unwashed sheets, layered over the faint chemical heat of a fluorescent tube that never turned off. Wren was sitting up on the bed, already awake or never asleep. Her eyes found mine the way eyes find something they've been looking for in the dark immediately without searching. She didn't run to me. She didn't cry. She nodded once the way someone nods when a thing they've been counting on finally arrives. I knew you would come, she said. I just didn't know when. Her voice was flat. Not because she didn't feel anything, because she'd trained herself not to show it. That's what places like this do. They don't break your emotions. They teach you to keep your face still until stillness becomes the only face you have. She was thinner than she'd been through the binoculars. Up close, it was worse. Her wrists, her collarbones, the way the moss-green uniform hung on her frame, like it had been issued to someone who used to be larger. She'd been here 6 weeks. She looked like she'd been here 6 months. She was 13 years old. She had been locked in a windowless room for weeks. And the first thing she did when her father opened the door was reach under her mattress and pull out an old shoe. Not ask for help, not collapse. Hand me something she'd built. Take the sole off, she said, carefully. I knelt on the concrete floor and peeled the sole away from the canvas upper. The leather cracked along the seam. Inside, taped flat against the insole, was a small circuit. A Bluetooth speaker gutted and rewired its microphone intact, connected to a micro SD chip, no bigger than my thumbnail. I knew my phone was being monitored from the first day, Wren said. She was speaking in the same flat measured tone, reporting not confessing. A girl in my room had an old Bluetooth speaker, broken, she thought. The microphone still worked. I needed a micro SD chip and a soldering iron from the maintenance shed. It took me 3 nights. 3 nights. The maintenance shed isn't locked between 2 and 4 a.m., I checked. I held the chip between my thumb and forefinger. It weighed almost nothing. It contained everything. 47 recordings, Wren said. Teachers giving orders. Sounds from the hallway at night. 3 conversations between the principal and a woman on the phone about timelines. Contract triggers a beneficiary change. She paused. The 3rd recording is the one you need to hear first. I pulled my phone from the coverall pocket and inserted the chip through an adapter I carried for field data transfers. The file was dated 8 days ago. I pressed play. Celeste Pennington's voice came through first measured business, like the same polished cadence I'd heard in the visitor lounge. The timeline hasn't changed. 11 days. After the contract triggers, the beneficiary is already set. Then we handle the other problem. A second voice. How long does the girl need to stay? Until the job is done. Until the job is done. That was my wife's voice. The woman who had kissed me goodbye at the kitchen door and told me to drive safe. The woman who had rubbed my shoulder when Rex died and said he'd had a good long life, discussing when it would be convenient for my daughter to be released from a locked room after the job was done. The job being me. I stopped the recording. The fluorescent tube flickered at the bad end. The room smelled like disinfectant and captivity, and the particular staleness of air that hasn't been exchanged with the outside world in weeks. Ren sat on the edge of the bed, watching me process what she had already processed alone in this room in the dark, without anyone to hand it to. I looked at her. She looked back with an expression I will never forget, and will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve not relief, not fear, but the steady gaze of someone who had been carrying a weight no adult should carry, let alone a child, and was now finally handing part of it to the one person she'd kept believing would come. There are 47 recordings on that chip, Dad, but that's not all. She reached into her pillowcase and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Lined notebook paper covered edge to edge in small, precise handwriting numbers, names, account codes. I photographed every document in the principal's office 4 days ago. She called me in to sign a behavior report and left me alone for 6 minutes. I used my eyes because they'd already taken my phone. I drew everything from memory afterward. She held the paper out to me. These are the account numbers. Everyone I could remember. I got 14. I folded the paper with the account numbers into my coverall pocket, alongside the micro SD chip, and took my daughter's hand. Her fingers were thin and cold, and they gripped mine with a strength that didn't match her frame. We stepped into the hallway, and the cook was already there, except he wasn't a cook anymore. Leland Stanton stood in the corridor without his apron, his FBI badge held face up at chest height, catching the fluorescent light in a way that turned it into the most visible thing in the building. He was the same man I'd watched through binoculars, making eggs, same salt and pepper hair, same unhurried posture. But everything about him had changed. His eyes were different. The kitchen stillness had been a performance. This was operational. FBI, he said low and fast. I've been in this kitchen for 8 months. I have enough evidence for all 3 locations here, Georgia and Virginia. The task force out of Charlotte was activated at 3 a.m. They'll be here in 40 minutes. But we need to get out of this building before anyone wakes up and sees us. I stared at him. 8 months. This man had been washing dishes and chopping vegetables and watching children be mistreated for 8 months, filing it, time-stamping it, building a case piece by piece while keeping his hands steady and his cover intact. I didn't know what that cost a person. I knew it was more than I could calculate. Ren looked at his hands. She'd been watching people for 6 weeks with nothing else to do, and she'd gotten very good at it. Chia, I knew you weren't a real chef from the first week, she said. Her voice was the same flat, reporting tone. Chefs' hands have burn scars and calluses from hot pans. Yours are smooth. You hold a knife like someone who learned from a manual, not a kitchen. Leland looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, respect maybe, or the particular sadness of a man who recognized what it meant that a 13-year-old had learned to read people with that precision in a place like this. You're sharper than half my field office, he said. But I had 6 weeks with nothing to do but watch people, Ren said. It wasn't a boast. It was an invoice. Leland turned toward the emergency exit at the far end of the corridor. Stay behind me. No talking until we're outside. There are children sleeping in these rooms, and I will not be the reason any of them wake up scared. We made it 12 steps before the far end of the hallway filled with a man. The one they called Mr. Graves filled the doorway the way a truck fills a loading bay, not just standing in it, but occupying it, displacing the air around him. Boyd Pennington was 35, Celeste Pennington's younger brother, a man wanted in Texas for aggravated assault, who had found the one place no one would look for him, a boarding school in rural North Carolina where his sister ran the operation and gave him a fake name and a teaching title. He had a radio in his hand. His thumb was already on the transmit button. Nobody moves, he said. I've called the headmistress. You're trespassing on private property, and you will... Boyd Pennington was a big man who was used to filling doorways. But there's a difference between filling a doorway and holding one. I had been holding ground on bridge decks in crosswinds for 20 years. A hallway was nothing. I took one step forward. Not a threat, just a step. The step of a man who had been bending rebar and reading structural failures since before this person was born and was no longer interested in conversation. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't raise my voice. I positioned myself between Boyd and the girl behind me, and I stood still. Boyd hesitated. 1 second. The hesitation of a man who was used to controlling rooms with volume and size and had never encountered someone who controlled them by being absolutely quiet. That second was all Leland needed. He moved behind Boyd with a speed that didn't match the unhurried cook I'd watched through binoculars. Arm behind the back, wrist control. Boyd went to his knees, the handcuffs ratcheted shut, with a sound like a deadbolt closing precise, final mechanical. His real name is Boyd Pennington. Leland said, breathing evenly. Celeste's younger brother. Wanted in Texas. He just became my most cooperative witness. He looked at Boyd on the linoleum. He doesn't know it yet. Wren's hand was on the back of my jacket sleeve. I could feel her grip through the fabric, not pulling, not pushing. Anchoring. She was anchoring herself to me the way I'd anchored myself to the hallway floor. We were both doing the same thing, standing our ground. Boyd was face down on the floor when the radio on his belt crackled. Celeste Pennington's voice came through the static, clipped, urgent stripped of the polished warmth she'd used in the visitor lounge. "What is the situation report?" Silence. Boyd's mouth was pressed against the linoleum. He couldn't answer if he wanted to. The radio crackled again. "Boyd, report immediately. Call the contact now." Leland picked up the radio and turned it off. He looked at me. She said contact. Not police, not deputy, contact. That means she has someone else, someone we haven't identified, and she's calling them now. He checked his watch. Task Force ETA 32 minutes. We need to be outside this building in the next 60 seconds. Wren tugged my sleeve once. I looked down at her. She was staring at the radio in Leland's hand, with an expression I recognized, the same expression she'd had at 7 years old when she heard a sound in the house at night and was deciding whether to investigate or wait. "She won't call police," Wren said quietly. "She'll call someone worse." Leland looked at her, then at me. Then he started moving toward the exit. We cleared the emergency exit in 8 seconds. Leland first, then Wren, then me. The cold mountain air hit us like a wall after the stale building, and for 1 second everything was just darkness and wet grass, and the sound of our boots on gravel. Then the headlights hit us. 2 county cruisers sat nose to nose across the iron gate engines, running light bars, dark. They'd been positioned before we even left the building. Celeste hadn't called them when Boyd went down, she'd called them before. This was standing protocol. The moment anything went wrong inside Cedar Haven, the gate sealed. The lead cruiser's door opened. Deputy Harlan Graves stepped out, the same sunburned deputy from 2 days ago, the same careful neutrality in his posture, except now his hand rested near his holster instead of on his belt buckle. A second officer stayed in the passenger seat of the other cruiser engine, idling, watching. Leland held his badge up at shoulder height. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Leland Stanton. Charlotte Field Office. These 2 are under my protection. Step aside." Graves didn't move. "I need confirmation from my superiors before I can let anyone leave this property." "Then call them. Right now. My task force is 25 minutes out, and when they arrive, everyone standing at this gate will have a very specific conversation about obstruction of a federal investigation. That includes you, deputy." Personally, his hand was near his gun. "I want you to understand that. A county officer paid by the people who had locked my daughter in a windowless room. had his hand near his weapon while my 13-year-old stood behind me in the dark. Ren's grip tightened on my arm. Not out of fear, out of the specific anger of someone who has watched adults fail her for 6 weeks straight and is watching it happen one more time. Graves looked at Leland's badge. He looked at me. He looked at Ren, a thin girl in a moss-green uniform standing between two men on a gravel driveway at 5:50 in the morning. Something moved in his face. Not conscience, exactly. The arithmetic of a man calculating which side of this he wanted to be standing on when the sun came up. "I need to make a call," Graves said. "Make it," Leland said. Graves reached for his radio. Stopped. Reached instead for his personal phone, the one clipped to the back of his belt, not the department issue unit on his shoulder. He dialed a number. It rang twice. Someone answered. He listened. "Before I tell you what happened in those 11 seconds, before I explain what was said on the other end of that call that changed everything, I need to ask you something. Are you still with me? Because this is where it turns. Drop your prediction in one sentence. Who do you think was on the other end of that phone? Please note, what follows contains some recreated details for narrative purposes. The message is what I hope stays with you. 11 seconds. That's how long the call lasted. I counted because counting is what I do when I can't control what's happening. I measure it instead. 11 seconds of a man standing in pre-dawn darkness, listening to a voice that rearranged his entire understanding of the situation he was standing in. His face went the color of wet paper. Not slowly the way people go pale from illness. All at once the way a screen changes when you hit a switch. Whatever he heard in those 11 seconds dismantled whatever arrangement he'd been honoring, whatever monthly deposit had been making. The gate calls feel like routine. Whatever story he'd been telling himself about private institutions and proper channels and parents who just needed to follow procedure. He hung up. He put the phone back on his belt. He stepped to the side of the cruiser and looked at the ground. "Gucci," he said. One word. He didn't look at Leland. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Ren. He looked at the gravel under his boots like a man who had just been told the floor he was standing on was not, in fact, a floor. We walked past the cruisers. Ren held my arm. The gravel crunched under our boots, and the sound was the loudest thing in the world, because everything else had gone silent. The radios, the engines, the deputy who stood motionless beside his cruiser watching us leave the way. A man watches something he knows he'll have to explain later and doesn't yet have the words. Leland was already on his phone, walking fast, coordinating with the Charlotte team. His voice was low and precise and professional, and I could hear phrases like "evidence secured," and 3 subjects, and 40 minutes to full perimeter. But they registered the way highway signs register when you're driving too fast. Present, but not landing. The sun was just starting behind the eastern ridge. That thin gray light that makes everything look like it's deciding whether to exist. The iron gate was behind us. The building was behind us. The padlocked door and the fluorescent tube and the bucket in the corner were behind us. We were on the public road, free of the building, free of the gate, free of the deputy and his wet paper face and whatever voice had told him in 11 seconds that his world had changed. And then Ren said it, not looking at me, looking straight ahead at the road, at the thin gray light, at nothing. Her voice so quiet I almost missed it under the sound of our boots on gravel. "Dad, is Rex okay?" A pause. "Does he miss me?" The mountain air was sharp and clean, and I could taste the end of something and the beginning of something else. And I didn't answer, because I didn't know how to say what I knew without breaking the one person I'd just crawled 340 meters underground to save. I didn't answer right away. We walked to the rental car in silence, and I drove us to the house, my house, our house, the one with the backyard where Rex used to lie in the afternoon sun. Ren didn't ask again. She sat in the passenger seat, watching the road, and waiting the way she waits for everything now, patiently, without expectation. like someone who has learned that answers come when they come and pushing doesn't help. The porch light caught the fog rolling off the pasture in slow ribbons. I sat on the top step, holding a river stone I'd picked up 3 years ago on Rex's last good walk along the Green River. Wren came out and sat beside me. She didn't ask if I was okay. Instead, she placed something between us on the step. A piece of paper crumpled and reflattened, held together with tape along 3 creases where it had been torn. "I wasn't snooping," she said. "I needed my birth certificate for my passport application last spring, and the filing cabinet was locked, so I checked Lorraine's office. The shredder basket had this in it." I taped it back together. I picked it up. A veterinary receipt. Rex's name at the top. The date was 11 days before he died. The vet's handwritten note in the margin read, "Excellent health for age, strong heart. Good blood work. See you in 6 months." Rex never made that follow-up. "That's his last checkup," I said. The vet said he was healthy. 11 days before he died. I know, Dad. I counted 2. "Why didn't you show me this when you found it?" She was quiet for a moment. The fog thinned. Somewhere in the tulip poplar by the fence line, a mockingbird cycled through Stolen Song's cardinal, then something that sounded like a wren, then something I couldn't name. It had been singing every morning for a year, and I'd never once heard it. Lorraine always had the kitchen radio on by 5. I wondered now if that was intentional, because I didn't want it to be true, Wren said. "And because you were already so tired, Dad. You were already disappearing a little bit every day, and I thought if I showed you this, I'd lose you too." 3 years of doubt collapsed into a single veterinary receipt, taped together by a 13-year-old who'd been protecting her father while he thought he was protecting her. Every conversation we'd had about Rex, the gentle memorial, the framed photo on the mantel, the way Lorraine had rubbed my shoulder and said he'd had a good long life, all of it recalibrated in a single breath. "My dad," her voice was different now, not flat, not reporting, direct. "Did she poison Rex? I don't have proof of..." "I'm not asking about proof. I'm asking what you believe." The stone was smooth in my hand, river-worn. The kind you skip across water if you're the kind of person who wastes good stones. I turned it over once. "Yes," I said. "I believe she did." We sat in silence for a full minute. The fog continued to thin. The mockingbird kept cycling. Wren watched me turn the stone in my hand, the one from Rex's last walk, and when I put it in my jacket pocket, deliberately like holstering something I intended to keep, she nodded once. "Then we finish this," she said. "All of it. Every lie she told, every dollar she moved, every person she hurt. Not just for us. There are children, Wren, across 3 states, 180. Then for them too." The gravel driveway crunched before I could answer. 3 black SUVs came up the road in formation, headlights cutting the fog into columns. They parked in a row. The lead vehicle's door opened, and a woman stepped out, holding a manila folder. Agent Delphine Cordero, FBI Charlotte Field Office, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back. The composed authority of someone who had spent her career walking into situations exactly like this one. Her jaw was set in a way that told me the warrants in her hand weren't the only thing she was carrying. "Suto tila tionda, Mr. Holbrook. We have warrants for 4 individuals, including your wife. We also have authorization to seize all devices, financial records, and the contents of the home safe. The safe combination is Wren's birthday," I said. She picked it, said it was the one number she'd never forget. Well, that's noted. Cordero's expression shifted, something careful moving behind her eyes. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you know where your wife is right now?" "Home. She texted me at midnight, said she had a headache and was turning in early." Her phone is pinging from your home address, which is consistent. Cordero checked her own phone. Then she signaled her team to hold position. But we also have... She stopped, looked at Wren, looked back at me. Mr. Holbrook, I need you to call her, right now. Act normal. Can you do that? What aren't you telling me? Call her first, then we'll talk. I pulled out my phone. Lorraine's contact photo smiled up at me, a selfie from the Biltmore 2 Christmases ago. Wearing earrings I'd bought her with money I now knew she'd already stolen and replaced. I pressed call. She picked up on the second ring. Voice bright. Rested. The thermostat warmth back in place, perfectly calibrated for a woman who didn't know the walls had already come down. Good morning, sweetheart. I was just about to schedule you a routine doctor checkup for Friday. You've been looking so tired lately. Routine doctor checkup. Friday. 9 days from now. I looked at Cordero. She was already writing something on her notepad. She'd heard it through the phone's speaker. She circled the word Friday and held it up for me to see. Underneath, she'd written, Derek Yancey, 10 days. The pattern wasn't just financial, it was procedural. And the procedure had just announced itself. Cordero didn't need to explain what Friday meant. The pattern had already explained itself, a doctor's appointment scheduled 9 days out, the same window that preceded Derek Yancey's death on an oil rig in Louisiana. She held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. I pressed call while 6 agents in tactical vests moved silently toward my own front door. Lorraine picked up on the second ring. Good morning, sweetheart. I already called Dr. Haddon's office. I got you that Friday appointment. You've been looking so tired lately. My voice came out steady. I don't know how. Friday works. I'll be home in about 20 minutes. Perfect. I'll make breakfast. You sound tired, honey. Did you sleep at the motel? Slept fine. See you soon. I hung up. Cordero was already signaling the entry team, 2 through the front, 2 through the back, 2 holding the perimeter. They moved across the lawn like something rehearsed, which it was. I stood in the driveway with Wren beside me and watched federal agents approach the house where I'd eaten dinner every night for 14 months, believing I was loved. The front door opened without resistance. It was unlocked. Lorraine always left it unlocked in the morning. She said it made the house feel welcoming. I understood now that it made the house feel like hers. I heard it from outside. Cordero's voice, clear and procedural, carrying through the open door into the morning air. Lorraine Prescott Holbrook, you are under arrest on federal charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Additional charges are pending. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Then Lorraine's voice. Not to Cordero. To me. She knew I was close enough to hear. What is this? Tell them this is a mistake. I didn't answer. I watched through the kitchen window from the driveway. She was standing at the island in her robe, coffee pot still gurgling behind her. When the agents entered, her expression cycled through 3 masks in 2 seconds. Confusion first, then outrage, then a serene smile that settled into wounded wife. 3 faces, selected and discarded like cards from a hand. And the one she chose to play was the one she thought would work on me. It had always worked on me. Sweetheart, whatever they told you, they're using you. You know me. I knew her. For the first time, I actually did. They moved her to the living room. Cordero took me upstairs to the bedroom. The safe was in the closet, a fireproof box with a combination lock. I gave them the code. Wren's birthday. The agents opened it, and Cordero put on latex gloves and began removing the contents. $6 million, 3 policies, and a sticky note reminding her to catch me when I was relaxed, like a fisherman noting which bait works at which depth. The policies were pre-filled life insurance applications, $2 million each, from 3 different carriers, with every field completed except my signature. The application dates went back 14 months to the month after our wedding. A yellow sticky note in Lorraine's handwriting was pressed to the inside of the top folder. Wait until after holidays, he signs things when relaxed. She asked me to sign paperwork last Christmas, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone standing farther away. Called it updated homeowner's coverage. I was wrapping Wren's gift. Told her I'd do it after New Year's. Cordero looked at me. That delay may have saved your life, Mr. Holbrook. I thought about Christmas morning. Wren opening her gift, a field microscope she'd asked for. Lorraine smiling beside the tree coffee in hand, the picture of patience. She wasn't patient. She was waiting. And the only reason I was standing here now instead of being a line item in an insurance file was that I'd been too busy with my daughter's present to sign my own death. The bedroom smelled like jasmine. Lorraine's perfume soaked into the pillows and the curtains and the air itself. An agent lifted the mattress on her side and found it a prepaid phone in a black case tucked between the mattress and the box spring. 847 messages. One for every 2 days she'd kissed me goodnight. Cordero scrolled through them. The messages were to a single contact. No name, just a number, and they were clinical. No affection, no slang, no pleasantries, pure operational language. Schedules, account numbers, status updates. The kind of communication you'd find between a project manager and a subcontractor, except the project was my family and the deliverable was everything I owned. The earliest message is February 15th, Cordero said. Your company event where you met Lorraine, when was that? May 10th, 3 months later. She'd been texting about me 3 months before she spilled wine on my jacket at the spring fundraiser. 3 months before the accident that wasn't an accident, the apology that wasn't an apology, the dinner that wasn't a dinner. The entire relationship, every smile, every touch. Every morning coffee she poured me had been preceded by a text message to someone else confirming that the asset threshold had been met. Mr. Holbrook, I need you to read this first message yourself. Out loud if you can. Cordero handed me the phone. The screen was cracked, and the text was small, and the phone was warm in my hand, the way phones get when they've been hidden under something for a long time. I read it. February 15th, 8:47 p.m. From Lorraine to the unnamed contact. 7 words that rewrote every moment of the last 2 years of my life. New target, federal engineer. Will introduce at the event on the 15th. Widower preferred but divorced acceptable. Confirm asset threshold met. I set the phone on the dresser. The jasmine perfume hung in the air. The coffee pot was still gurgling downstairs. And the woman who had written those words was sitting in my living room in handcuffs, probably still smiling. I was a target before I was a husband. That sentence sat in my chest, like a stone, while Cordero drove us to Cedar Haven. The burner phone was bagged in evidence. The text was seared into memory. Everything that followed had the quality of machinery in motion. Cedar Haven Academy's front doors were propped open for morning drop-off, and the FBI walked in like they were early for a conference. I watched from the hallway. Cordero had told me to stay back. This was her operation now. Agents moved through the main corridor past children's artwork taped to cinder block walls, past a trophy case with brass plaques for academic excellence, past a bulletin board advertising a fall harvest festival that would never happen. The hallway smelled like dry erase markers and institutional floor wax, the universal scent of buildings where children are supposed to be safe. Celeste Pennington's office door was open. She was seated behind her desk with her hands folded on the laminate surface, composed, waiting. Her laptop screen was dark. She'd wiped it. Deputy Graves's warning call had given her a 20-minute head start, and she'd used it. I assume you have a warrant? Celeste said as Cordero entered. I'll need to see it before you touch anything in this building. These are children's records. FERPA protected. We have warrants for you, your office, your vehicle, and your home, Cordero said, placing the documents on the desk. FERPA doesn't cover fraud evidence, Ms. Pennington. It's Dr. Pennington, and I'd like to call my attorney. She was good. Her voice didn't waver. Her hands stayed folded. She looked at the warrant, the way someone reads a restaurant menu with the polite interest of a person who already knows what they're going to order. She had prepared for this moment, the way she prepared for everything, with rehearsal, with contingency, with the absolute confidence that she was smarter than whoever was standing across from her. An agent opened the second desk drawer. Inside, beneath a stack of manila folders, sat an external hard drive in a black case. The label read, Martinez Transfer Records. Celeste's composure fractured for exactly 1 second. Her nostrils flared. Her fingers curled against the desk edge. Then she reset, smooth, instantaneous, like a screen refreshing. But Cordero had been watching her hands, not her face. You wiped a laptop and left a hard drive labeled with a fake student name in an unlocked drawer, Cordero said. 200 gigabytes. That's not a transfer record, Dr. Pennington. That's a ledger. She'd locked the front door and left the garage wide open. The same organizational precision that had built a 3-state operation had left its blueprint sitting in a drawer she'd forgotten to check because she was too busy destroying the more obvious evidence. That's how systems fail, not at the points you reinforce, but at the ones you assume are too small to matter. That's a student file, Celeste said. You have no right. We also have 143 photographs, Cordero said. Taken 4 days ago, from inside this office. Every screen, every document, every folder in that cabinet. Taken by a 13-year-old student who understood exactly what she was looking at. Celeste went still. Not the calculated stillness of someone maintaining composure, the stillness of someone encountering a variable they hadn't modeled. She had accounted for Leland. She had accounted for the FBI. She had accounted for lawyers and warrants and hard drives and the possibility that her laptop might need to be wiped on short notice. She had not accounted for a 13-year-old girl with a memory for numbers and 6 minutes alone in this office. How many adults had walked past this room in 3 years and noticed nothing? How many teachers, how many visiting parents, how many county officials had sat in the chair across from that desk and accepted whatever Celeste told them? And a 7th grader walked in, once looked at the walls, and photographed the whole operation because nobody thought a child would know what she was seeing. Leland stepped into the doorway. No apron, no spatula. The FBI badge was clipped to his belt now. He looked at Celeste, the way you look at a structure after the inspection is complete and the report is already written. So I knew from the 3rd month, he said. Every wire, every rerouted dollar, I saw it. But I didn't stop you then because the case wasn't big enough yet. He paused. Chico, a 13-year-old is the one who had enough. Think about that on the drive. The handcuffs clicked behind Celeste's back. The sound echoed off the wood-paneled walls, metallic, precise, final. She didn't flinch. She looked past Leland, past the agents, past me standing in the hallway, and stared directly at the security camera mounted above the east exit. She won't talk, Celeste said. The agent beside me shifted. Celeste laughed. A single sound, airless like the last breath leaving a sealed room. She said nothing else. They walked her down the hallway. 2 rows of 7th graders were pressed against the lockers, silent, wide-eyed, watching their principal move between federal agents in handcuffs. Celeste didn't look at any of them. She kept her eyes forward until she reached the east exit, and then she turned her head and looked directly into the security camera above the door. She held eye contact with the lens for 3 full seconds, deliberate, unhurried, the way someone delivers a message to a specific audience, and mouthed 2 words I couldn't read from where I stood. The agent beside me could. He pressed his radio immediately. I stood in the hallway holding a cup of vending machine coffee that had gone cold in my hand. and watched the doors close behind her. The seventh graders slowly unstuck themselves from the lockers. A girl near the front was crying quietly. A boy beside her was holding her backpack straps because he didn't know what else to hold. Celeste's mouthed words were already being radioed to Cordero. Whatever she'd said, it wasn't a farewell. It was an instruction. The agent who read Celeste's lips radioed 2 words to Cordero. Burn 8. Whatever that meant, it meant someone else was still out there. Cordero dispatched a trace team before we left the Cedar Haven parking lot. How many times can you learn your wife planned to kill you before the number stops meaning anything? I was about to find out. The FBI field office in Charlotte was a low concrete building off a highway feeder road, the kind of structure that looks like it was designed to be forgotten. Cordero led Leland and me into a briefing room with a long table, a projector, and a coffee pot that smelled like it had been burning since morning. Nobody had touched it. Nobody was here for coffee. Cordero spread the Lafourche County accident file across the table. Manila folders photocopied reports, a coroner's summary, and a single photograph, a young man in a hard hat, smiling on a rig platform. I'd seen that photo on my laptop in a motel room 4 days ago. Seeing it printed on paper in an FBI briefing room made it heavier. Derek Yancey, Cordero said. 31. Pipeline integrity engineer. Died 14 months into his marriage to Lorraine. Offshore rig incident ruled accidental. The Lafourche Parish Sheriff closed the investigation in 19 days. 19 days for a workplace fatality on a federal jurisdiction rig, I said. Standard minimum is 60. The sheriff who signed the closure received $120,000 from an LLC registered to Celeste Pennington. The payment came 6 weeks after he filed his report. Routed through a Delaware shell. $120,000. That's what it cost to close a murder in 19 days. Less than the tuition at Cedar Haven. Less than the amount siphoned from my accounts over 6 months. In the accounting of this operation, buying a sheriff was a mid-range expense significant enough to notice, small enough to bury in the ledger between utility payments and property maintenance. Cordero opened a forensic report. The FBI lab reviewed the original evidence photos. The safety harness coupling showed tool marks consistent with a rotary cable cutter, scored at the stress point, weakened enough to fail under load, but not enough to be visible during a standard morning check. Luther Yancey told me his son inspected his equipment every morning, I said. He did. The tampering happened overnight. Someone accessed the equipment locker after the last safety check. The locker code was found in the messages on Lorraine's burner phone. A rotary cable cutter costs $11 at any hardware store. That's what a man's life was worth on a credit card statement, $11, and a locker code texted at midnight. Derek Yancey checked his harness every morning because he was careful and methodical and believed that preparation prevented catastrophe. He was right about everything, except the one variable he couldn't have modeled. The person sleeping next to him had already purchased the tool that would kill him. Cordero turned on the projector. The screen filled with a spreadsheet, columns of data recovered from Celeste's hard drive, the one she'd forgotten in the unlocked drawer. 11 rows. Each row was a name. This is the target list, Cordero said. 11 names, each one rated across 4 categories: net worth, social isolation score, life insurance ceiling, and a column labeled timeline to event. Derek Yancey is number 4. His timeline said 8 months. She scrolled down. Row 7 was highlighted in yellow. I stared at my own name on that spreadsheet, number 7, right column, timeline to event, 14 months, and realized I was reading my own obituary draft, written by the woman who had kissed me goodnight every one of those 14 months, while the clock she'd set ticked underneath us like a charge in a foundation. The numbers 1 through 3 we're still identifying, Cordero said. The records go back 9 years. Leland sat forward in his chair. 9 years. They've been running this for 9 years, at minimum. The spreadsheet was created in 2014. The first 3 entries use initials only, no full names, no addresses. We're cross-referencing with insurance payouts and death records in 6 states. The projector fan hummed in the silence. I pressed my thumb into the wooden armrest of the briefing chair, hard enough to feel the grain. My mouth was dry. I hadn't had water since the arrest that morning. The taste in my mouth was the flat, metallic nothing of sustained adrenaline wearing down into something quieter and worse. 5 and 6, I said. Are they alive? Cordero looked at me. Both alive? One in Tennessee, one in Maryland? The operations were abandoned mid-execution, we don't yet know why. Possibly the targets relocated, or the risk profile changed. Neither man has any idea he was ever targeted. We're dispatching agents to both addresses today. I thought about that. 2 men somewhere in Tennessee and Maryland going about their evening making dinner, watching television, checking their email, not knowing that in a few hours an agent would knock on their door and explain that a woman they'd probably forgotten about had once measured their net worth against their life expectancy and decided they were worth pursuing. They would learn that the relationship they'd thought was bad luck or bad timing had been neither. It had been arithmetic. They were going to hear the same sentence I'd been hearing for 5 days, and it was going to rewrite everything they remembered about every conversation, every touch, every night they'd spent next to someone who was running numbers in the dark. Cordero turned to the last page of the spreadsheet. Rows 8 through 11 were empty, no names, just columns pre-filled with asset thresholds and target profiles. Minimum net worth, preferred occupation, geographic radius. These are open slots, she said. Active recruitment. The pipeline was still being filled. She looked at me. We found a draft message on Lorraine's burner phone dated 3 days ago. She was scouting number 8. The introduction method she described is identical to how she met you, a staged accident at a professional event. Same playbook. New target. 3 days ago. While I was crawling through a sewer to rescue my daughter, Lorraine was drafting the opening move on the next man she planned to marry and destroy. Target number 8 was a civil engineer in Raleigh. Widowed. 2 children. Net worth just above the threshold. Lorraine had drafted the introduction message 3 days ago while I was sleeping in a motel room, planning how to crawl through a sewer to save my daughter. The playbook was identical: staged accident at a professional event, wine on a jacket, an apology that becomes dinner. Same script. New actor. Tamara Redmond set her tripod on the sidewalk across from Cedar Haven Academy at 2 o'clock that afternoon, checked her framing once, and pressed the red button that would end 7 careers before dinner. I watched from the parking lot with Ren beside me. Tamara had changed since the cafe. The curated warmth was gone, replaced by something sharper. She stood in front of the camera in a plain jacket with no jewelry, no product placement, no filters. She looked directly into the lens and started reading from the publicly released FBI documents. Names, dollar amounts, locations. She read them the way a newsreader reads a verdict, clearly, steadily, without editorializing. The viewer count climbed in real time on her phone screen propped beside the tripod. 300,000 in 10 minutes. 1,000,000 in 40. The notification chimes cascaded over each other like coins falling into a metal tray. She interviewed 3 parents waiting behind the police tape. Mothers and fathers who had driven to Cedar Haven that morning after seeing the news, still processing, still doing the math between what they'd been told and what was true. Then she stepped aside, and Luther and Jolene Yancey walked into the frame. Luther held the framed photograph at chest height. Derek in his blue drilling company uniform, grinning alive. Jolene stood beside him, a small woman in her early 60s, who gripped her side of the frame with both hands, as if letting go would mean letting go of more than the picture. She spoke once on camera, and I will not repeat what she said, because it belongs to her. Luther spoke longer. Our son checked his safety equipment every single morning, Luther said. They told us it was an accident. It wasn't. It was purchased on a credit card and planned over a text message. We have been saying this for 4 years. Today someone finally listened. I stood 30 feet away, watching a man hold a photograph of his dead son on a sidewalk in North Carolina. And I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to understand until that moment. Luther Yancey looked exactly the way I would have looked if Lorraine had finished what she started. That photograph could have been mine. Ren could have been the one standing behind a camera holding a frame. The only difference between Luther's life and mine was a bridge that failed its foundation inspection and sent me home 5 weeks early. 180 children, counted quarterly. Updated in a spreadsheet formatted with the same column widths and font size Celeste used for the school's annual budget report. Not hidden in a secret file. Stored on the hard drive in the same folder as enrollment projections and vendor invoices, because to Celeste the census wasn't a secret, it was operations. By 4 o'clock, the live stream had reached 4.7 million views. The hashtag was trending nationally. 6 more parents called the FBI hotline within hours. Georgia and Virginia addresses were identified by viewers who recognized the descriptions from tomorrow's broadcast. The internet did in 90 minutes what the system hadn't done in 9 years. That evening, Boyd Pennington made his choice. He'd been in custody at the Charlotte field office since dawn. He'd asked for his attorney, spent 3 hours with him, then fired him. He requested a proffer session at 6 o'clock. Cordero called me with the update while I sat in the briefing room hallway staring at a vending machine. How do you run a network across 3 states for 9 years? The same way you run a school. With systems. With staffing. With someone checking the numbers every quarter and adjusting the budget when costs exceeded projections. Boyd laid out the entire structure, 3 locations, 7 bribed officials, annual payments between $60,000 and $85,000 each, all routed through a Delaware entity. He described the children as census figures. He described the money as operational overhead. He described 9 years of exploitation in the language of a man who had never once considered the possibility that what he was describing was monstrous. Then he said something that changed the shape of the case. She knew Leland was yours from the 3rd month, but she couldn't touch him. If anything happened to a federal agent inside the operation, it would trigger an automatic counter-investigation. The whole network would surface. So she watched him. For 2 years, she watched her own husband build a case against her, and she couldn't do a single thing about it except move the money faster. Cordero leaned forward. She watched him for 2 years. She thought she'd finish before he did, Boyd said. She was wrong. Celeste Pennington. The woman who had controlled every variable, anticipated every threat, bought every official who might have noticed, had been trapped by her own operational logic. The same caution that protected the network made it impossible to eliminate the one person inside it who was dismantling it. She couldn't act against Leland without triggering the very investigation she was trying to prevent. So she sat across the dinner table from an FBI agent for 2 years and smiled. Cordero called me at 9 that evening. All 180 children confirmed safe. Georgia and Virginia sites raided simultaneously. 7 officials in custody across 3 states. The financial accounts were frozen. The Delaware shell was seized. I hung up and walked outside. The porch step was where I'd sat that morning with the veterinary receipt and the river stone and the fog rolling off the pasture. I sat down again. The evening air carried the last warmth of September sweet grass and cooling asphalt, and the particular stillness of a day that has used up everything it had. Ren came out. She sat beside me, her shoulder pressed against mine. But the bridge was suspended, she said quietly. I looked at her. She was smiling, the first real smile in 5 days. She was right. The bridge was suspended. And that suspension, a bureaucratic delay, a failed foundation inspection, a 5-week early release from a Tennessee project, was the reason I was sitting on this porch instead of being a line item on a spreadsheet. The thing that had kept me away from my daughter for weeks was the same thing that brought me home in time to save her. The bridge was suspended, and that suspension saved my life. I sat with that truth for 4 months while the lawyers prepared their cases, and I prepared for something harder, learning how to be home. 4 months between the arrests and the sentencing, and I spent most of them learning how to be home by 6. I quit the long-distance work. Took a local infrastructure consulting position home every night, 30% less pay a desk instead of a bridge deck. The math didn't make sense on paper, but I was learning that the math of presence works nothing like the math of engineering. The returns compound in directions you can't draw on a blueprint. The sentencing was on a Tuesday in January. Charlotte Federal Courthouse, 4th floor courtroom 4B. The gallery was full reporters, parents from all 3 sites, 2 rows of federal agents who had worked the case, and Luther Yancey sitting in the 3rd row with Jolene beside him, both of them upright and still, holding nothing this time because the photograph was no longer needed. The record had been corrected. The judge read the sentences in order. Celeste Pennington first. 23 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, money laundering, and exploitation of minors across 3 states. 42 years. She stood motionless when the number was read, her hands folded in front of her the same way they'd been folded the morning the FBI walked into her office. She didn't flinch. She had never flinched. Lorraine was next. 18 counts. 28 years. She stood differently, softer, her shoulders slightly forward, the posture of a woman performing vulnerability for a room full of people she assumed would respond to it. When the judge finished, she turned and found me in the gallery. She didn't speak. She mouthed 5 words slowly, the way someone mouths words when they want to be sure they're read. You'll never know if any of it was real. It was her last manipulation. Disguised as honesty, designed to plant the one seed she could still plant, doubt. Even now, even in handcuffs, even facing 28 years, she was still working, still performing, still selecting which face to show and which words to leave behind, like a thumbtack on a chair you'll sit in later. I looked at her. I didn't mouth anything back. I didn't need to. Boyd received 15 years plus pending extradition to Texas. 7 officials across 3 states received sentences ranging from 2 to 8 years. Cordero found me in the hallway during the recess. The total asset recovery was $14.8 million. The judge had approved a victim treatment fund, first allocation to the children. You're entitled to a personal recovery claim, Cordero said. The forged transfers, the land, the contract redirect au hombament. I shook my head. Whatever was mine, put it in the fund. She started to say something else. I shook my head again, and she stopped. There was nothing in those accounts I wanted back. Every dollar had been touched by hands that had used them to build a machine for hurting people. I'd rather start from a local consultant's salary and sleep at night than reclaim money that smelled like the inside of a safe, where my own death had been filed next to the insurance forms. The courtroom reconvened for victim impact statements. Wren had asked to speak. The judge had approved it. She walked to the podium in a plain blue sweater and dark pants, holding 5 pages of lined notebook paper, the same handwriting I'd seen on the sheet of account numbers she'd drawn from memory in room 7. 5 pages. A 13-year-old stood in a federal courtroom and read 5 pages without her voice breaking once. Every adult in that room, including me, couldn't manage the same. A woman in the 2nd row was crying by page 2. A federal agent in the back was looking at the ceiling. I was looking at the floor because I couldn't look at my daughter's face while she described what had been done to her and remain the composed, measured man I was supposed to be. They told me my father had signed papers giving up guardianship, Wren read. I believed it for 3 days. On the 4th day, I put a recording device in my shoe because my father taught me that when something doesn't sound right, you measure it twice. The courtroom was silent. Not the polite silence of attention. The pressed, airless silence of a room full of people holding their breath. "My father isn't good at saying what he feels," Wren said. She looked up from the pages for the first time. She looked at me. But he drove 7 hours and crawled through a 90-centimeter sewer pipe at 5 in the morning to find me. I think that's how he said it. She folded the pages, stepped down, walked past me without stopping. She didn't need to. She'd already said it. I swallowed courthouse water from a paper cup during the next recess. It was metallic and flat, and I drank 3 of them because my mouth hadn't been dry like this since the morning I stood outside Cedar Haven's gate. Weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon in late January, I dug a hole in the backyard. The spot where Rex used to lie in the afternoon sun, the patch of grass worn flat by the weight of a dog who spent every warm day stretched out in the same place, waiting for the same people to come home. Wren came outside without being asked. She picked up the second shovel. We dug in silence until the hole was the right depth, and I set the forsythia root ball into the red clay and packed the soil around it with my bare hands. "Forsythia blooms in early spring," Wren said. Rex would have liked that. Yellow was his favorite thing to roll in. The dogs don't have favorite colors. Rex did. She stood up and brushed the dirt off her knees and turned toward the house. The late January light caught her profile jaw cheekbone, the way she pushed her hair back from her face with her wrist. And I saw her mother, not Lorraine, her real mother. The woman who had died when Wren was 2, whose face I had avoided seeing in my daughter's features for 11 years because the resemblance cut too close. It didn't cut anymore. For the first time it was warm. The auditorium held 200 folding chairs, and Wren had insisted on standing at the podium instead of sitting beside me, because she said sitting made it sound like a story, and standing made it sound like instructions. She was right. She was right about most things now at 15 months past the arrests in ways that made me proud and terrified in equal measure. I watched her adjust the microphone too tall. She cranked it down without asking for help, and I thought about the January light on her profile and how her mother's face had stopped hurting me. That warmth had stayed. It had settled somewhere behind my sternum like a pilot light I didn't know I'd been missing. I spoke first. 200 parents in a school gymnasium outside Tryon, most of them skeptical, some of them scared a few, already crying before I opened my mouth. "I'm a federal infrastructure engineer," I said. "I inspect bridges for hidden stress fractures, and I missed every fracture in my own house for 3 years. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone in this room." I handed out the checklist. Single-page 9 questions. Things like, can you name 3 accounts your spouse manages? Do you receive your own mail unopened? When was the last time you read a document before signing it? If you can't answer 3 of them about your own finances right now, talk to someone tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. Chairs creaked. Someone in the 4th row folded the checklist into her purse without reading it. Someone else was already circling questions with a pen. Both reactions were correct. Then Wren stood up. She didn't use notes. She gripped the podium edges and looked at the back wall and started talking about what normal felt like inside Cedar Haven. After 2 weeks, I stopped asking to call my dad. Not because they told me to stop, because it started to feel like the asking was the strange part. That's how it works. The walls don't go up. The outside goes away. 200 chairs went silent. Not the polite silence of an audience waiting for the next slide. The silence of people recalculating. I was 13. I had a Bluetooth speaker and a recording app. The adults in that building had degrees and salaries, and they didn't do what a 7th grader with a $20 speaker did. She paused. Let it land. Ask yourself why. The pause lasted 4 seconds. It felt like 30. Nobody moved. Tamara filmed the whole talk from the side aisle. 12 million views in a week. But the number I kept thinking about was 2. The 2 parents who came up afterward and said they were going home to check their filing cabinets tonight. Afterward, the crowd thinned. I was stacking chairs when a voice came from the last row. I did this for 8 months with federal resources and a team. Leland stood slowly, hands in his jacket pockets. He'd retired early. The Bureau had offered a desk in Quantico, and he'd said no. You did it in 6 weeks with a Bluetooth speaker and a sewer pipe. I want you to know that bothers me, in a good way. You built the case that put them away for 42 years. I said, you built the reason the case mattered. We shook hands. He left through the side door. No dramatic exit, no lingering. That was Leland, the man said what he meant. And then he was gone. 3 days later, the Yanceys drove up from Lafayette. Luther carried a cardboard box into the yard and set it on the porch table like it might break. Inside, photographs, a work diary with oil-stained pages, hand tools in a leather roll. Derek's things. The toolbox was heavier than it looked, not from the wrenches and socket sets, but from the fact that every tool had been cleaned and oiled by a man who believed maintenance prevented catastrophe. He'd been right about everything except the one thing that killed him. Wren held a photograph of Derek smiling on a Gulf-rigged platform, sun behind him, hard hat pushed back. Can you tell me about him? She said. Not the case. Him. Jolene sat down in the lawn chair and closed her eyes. He whistled when he cooked. Couldn't carry a tune to save his life, but he whistled every morning making eggs. I used to say it was the only alarm clock I needed. He would have liked you, Wren, Luther said. He liked people who stood up straight when they talked. I made sweet tea, over-sugared it because I was nervous and measured twice. We sat in the yard until afternoon, trading stories about a man I'd never met who'd been number 6 on the same list, where I was number 7. The cedar shavings in his toolbox smelled like a workshop that had been closed with care. Luther walked to the edge of the yard and stopped at the forsythia bush. He stood there a long time. When he turned around, his eyes were wet. My son planted this exact one at his place in Lafayette. He said he liked it because it blooms before the leaves come and the color shows up first, before everything is ready. Wren looked at me. I looked at the yellow branches bending in the September wind. Neither of us had known. Wren turned 15 on a Tuesday, and the thing I noticed most was that she'd started leaving her bedroom door open at night. It had been closed for the first 14 months after we moved to the house outside Asheville. Closed and locked with a rubber doorstop wedged underneath for good measure. I never mentioned it. She never explained it. Then one morning in July, I walked past her room and saw the door standing wide open, her backpack on the floor. Her shoes kicked off in 2 different directions, and the window cracked to let in the sound of the creak. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at an open door like it was an engineering report that had come back clean after years of structural concern. "Dad, we're out of everything again," she called from the kitchen. "I'm not even sorry." She wasn't. She ate with the ferocity of someone making up for lost time a whole rotisserie chicken, standing at the counter on Wednesday, gone by Thursday morning. She had opinions about music I didn't understand, friends who arrived in cars I didn't recognize, and a laugh that filled the house the way Rex's bark used to fill it, sudden and too loud, and exactly the sound the rooms needed. I worked local contracts now. Bridge inspections for the county, nothing federal, nothing that took me farther than a 2-hour drive. Home by 6 every night. I cooked dinners that Wren critiqued with the authority of someone who'd once survived on cafeteria portions measured to the ounce. More salt, Dad? Always more salt. She was right about that, too. The nightmares still came. Less often, twice a month, maybe 3 times during a bad stretch. I'd hear the floorboard outside her room creak at 2 in the morning, and by the time I reached the kitchen, she'd already have the kettle on. Chamomile. The same box we'd been buying since the first week in the new house. The one with the cartoon bear on the front, that neither of us would ever admit to choosing. We never discussed the teacup. She never asked for it, and I never offered it. It just appeared between us on the bad nights like a third chair at the table, always there, never acknowledged, load-bearing. I'd push the cup toward her. She'd wrap both hands around it. We'd sit in the kitchen with the light over the stove and listen to the creak through the window until the shaking stopped. One night in August, she said 2 words, same one. "I know," I said. That was enough. I am a man who spent 30 years measuring stress tolerances in concrete and steel, and the most important engineering I ever learned was that a teacup pushed across a table at 2 in the morning carries more load than any bridge I've ever certified. If you're listening to this, and you have someone in your house who keeps trying to tell you something, a child, a friend, a dog, at 3 in the morning, stop what you're doing and listen, because they won't keep trying forever. She asked the question on a drive home from Raleigh. September evening, windows down the mountains, just starting to go gold at the edges. We'd done another parent talk, the 9th one. I'd stopped counting, but Wren hadn't, and she'd been quiet for 20 miles. Dad, what if the old drain hadn't been there? What if there was no sewer pipe? I didn't hesitate. Then I would have found another way in. She watched the highway for a while. The radio was playing something I didn't recognize, volume low, and the wind came through her cracked window, smelling like pine and cooling asphalt. "Yeah," she said. "I know." She leaned her seat back 3 degrees, her version of settling something permanently, and turned the volume up 1 notch. Not loud, just enough to say the conversation was finished and had ended exactly where it needed to. That evening, I took the river stone from the shelf by the front door. Smooth, palm-sized, the gray of deep creek water. I'd carried it home from Rex's last walk along the Green River, back when I still thought the worst thing that could happen to my family was losing a dog. The stone weighed almost nothing. River smoothed, the kind you skip across water if you're the sort of person who wastes good stones. I wasn't anymore. I set it on the kitchen windowsill, where Rex used to press his nose against the glass, waiting for me to come home. The forsythia was visible through the window, branches bending in the September wind, dark, bare, no blooms yet. But I knew they'd come. Yellow first before the leaves, before everything is ready. Luther had taught me that without meaning to, standing in my yard with wet eyes and a dead son's memory. Behind me, Wren's bedroom door was open. I could hear her talking on the phone, something about a group project and whether Jake actually said what he apparently said. The creek clicked over stones in the yard. The tea from the last bad night still sat in the sink, oversteeped and cold and bitter at the bottom, because neither of us ever remembered to time it. Rex barked at 3 in the morning on a night I wanted to keep sleeping. That bark is the reason I'm standing in this kitchen. The truth doesn't come through the things you want to hear. It comes through a bark at 3 a.m., a shoe with a speaker inside it, a receipt taped together by a 13-year-old who knew before any of us that something was wrong. And the only thing worse than that sound is the silence when it stops. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I was a man who inspected bridges for a living, trained to spot fractures invisible to the naked eye, and I missed every single warning sign inside my own home. I signed papers without reading them. I trusted the wrong person with my finances, my daughter, and my future. Don't make my mistake. Don't let comfort silence the questions you know you should be asking. The people closest to you deserve your attention, not just your trust. If there's one thing I learned crawling through that sewer pipe at 5 in the morning, it's that the truth rarely arrives when you're ready for it. It shows up at 3 a.m. in a bark you want to ignore. It shows up in a shoe with a speaker taped inside it, built by a 13-year-old braver than every adult around her. I believe God put me through this, so I could stand here and tell you, pay attention to the ones trying to warn you. His timing brought me to that gate before it was too late. The lesson isn't complicated. Listen to the people who love you, especially when what they're saying is hard to hear. That's the kind of wisdom Grandpa stories carry, the kind earned through pain, not books. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done differently in my place? If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Dad's Revenge Stories so you never miss another one of these grandpa stories that stay with you long after the last word. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. These grandpa stories exist because of listeners like you. Some details in this story were adjusted for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is coincidental. The message, pay attention, protect your family, and never stop listening, that part is as real as it gets.